What is reality? Philosophers have debated this for thousands of years. For me, it's the sum of our experience as a human. What we've read, what we've learned, what we've thought, what we've seen, everything we've experienced is woven into a fabric we think of as reality. And each of us has our own version of reality that we cling to. The Toltec spiritual guide Don Miguel Ruiz wrote in his book, The Four Agreements, "You live in a world of illusion made by images of light, of virtual reality."
Bob Cooney here with a new version of the Being Virtual Show, Deep Dive.
It's AI. And so when you talk about these three different technologies, metaverse, AI, and humanoids.
These are some of the new features in our fully immersive film school experiences.
Spatial computing devices, they've been used in both the consumer and the business world for decades now.
When you're in VR and you're hooked in like that, you have a really well-crafted experience.
The resulting superintelligence will not be alien, it will be human.
Artificial intelligence is something that will free our minds to be more creative.
Span the gaps between one thought and the next, just long enough to see a new vision of your life.
Essentiel de co-construire une culture du cybersexe qui nous libère, qui nous inspire.
Augmented reality is something that is just starting to crest. I urge you to build in this space. It's awesome.
We have launched VXR Labs, World of Simulators.
Voyager represents the future of VR cinema.
This is going to be the most self-indulgent Being Virtual deep dive that I've ever done.
It was freaking spectacular.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Bob.
One more thing.
With him.
I was definitely watching the dolphins.
I know.
Hi, Bob Cooney here, but you already know that. This is the first of a series of webinars. And the intention here is a lot of the webinars that I've done have been kind of really high level, skirting the surface, covering a lot of shit in a really short period of time. And I thought I would do something that was a little bit of a different approach where we can actually go really deep with people and deeper into subjects, deeper into products, deeper into technology, into solutions, into operations. And so for people that are really serious about VR, not just curious or interested, but really serious about it, this is the thing that hopefully people can really learn the inside shit that could make the difference between being successful or struggling or even, God forbid, failing.
What is reality? Philosophers have debated this for thousands of years. For me, it's the sum of our experience as a human. What we've read, what we've learned, what we've thought, what we've seen, everything we've experienced is woven into a fabric we think of as reality. And each of us has our own version of reality that we cling to. The Toltec spiritual guide Don Miguel Ruiz wrote in his book, The Four Agreements, "You live in a world of illusion made by images of light, of virtual reality." Hey, Bob Cooney here. Live deep dive number 1 of the new season of the Being Virtual show. And I'm actually coming to you from the deck of the Celebrity Constellation cruise ship docked outside of Cadiz, Spain. And they're looking for the last passenger before they can pull up the drawbridge and sail onto the Gibraltar Straits, heading to Barcelona. We're about 11 days, 12 days into a transatlantic cruise from Florida. I have no idea how many days it's been. I got a little bit of a cabin fever, but the beautiful thing about doing a live show every week is you never know where I'm going to be coming to you from. I did one from a traffic circle in downtown Berlin. And so thanks to Starlink and Elon Musk, love him or hate him, guy makes some amazing shit. And we're coming to you live from Starlink. So if this all breaks down, hashtag blame Elon. And I just want to mention that this show is brought to you by the Metaverse Tourism Board. What the heck is the Metaverse Tourism Board? Go to metaversetourismboard.com, put in your email, and you'll find out coming soon. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce my first guest this year. I'm so excited. Lisa Messeri. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much for having me here. You are definitely living a more glamorous life than I am, and I think the backgrounds prove that.
Yeah, but you're actually doing real meaningful work, and I'm just cruising around the world making up shit.
I'll swap if you want.
So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're watching, we are live streaming this to multiple social networks. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn Live, it's on X, it's on Twitch. And so you should be able to put in all your comments, and use StreamYard, and StreamYard should present them to me, and we'll get them in the show. We'll try to answer any questions that you have as they come up, and address any comments that come on. And they just turned off the lights. This is the beautiful thing of live television.
It's gonna be exciting.
Is they just turned off the lights. I spent an hour scouting the best location on the ship to do this, and then they killed the lights. So we're gonna move into this other room here where the lights are still on.
There we go. Or you're doing a big advertisement. Celebrity Cruises should be giving you some ad money for showing us the beautiful interiors.
The beautiful interior. We'll do a little tour, and it is 10 o'clock at night here, so it is well past wine o'clock. And so I am, coming to you with glass and wine in hand. So Lisa, let's first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I know it was last minute. Evan Helder was going to be kind of scheduled in, and he had some travel stuff, and I heard your podcast with Kent Bai and the Voices of VR. And for those of you who don't follow Kent, like, that guy is a legend. He's somebody that I look up to who's been consistently doing this shit for years, week in, week out. And so, I discovered your book through that podcast. Somehow it hadn't kind of crossed my radar. And I've always been, first of all, I've always been interested in ethnography. And so as a product person, I've done product development my whole career, and observational research is key to great product development. And then Kylie Savage, my partner, spent 6 years with a company called Huddle doing human-centered design, which is all about ethnography. And so when I heard that you were an anthropologist of science and technology, like, what the hell is that? And so and you're probably tired of answering this question, but can you start there and tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, completely. I don't expect anyone to know what anthropology is or ethnography. So I always welcome those, those opening questions. So I like to think of the anthropology of science and technology as thinking about all of the non-technical things about our technological and scientific worlds. So I'm very interested in the kind of culture that produces all of the amazing scientific knowledge and technological innovations that saturate our world. And anthropology traditionally is a discipline that goes to far off places and studies the quote unquote natives and tries to, understand distant cultures, very different from our own. I do the anthropology that actually is studying my own culture, US culture, highly saturated by technology and science, but at the same time applying the same methods that anthropologists use when they're studying the distant and the far off. So ethnography is sometimes described as deep hanging out, and that's what it is to do my research. I pick up and relocate myself for this project for a year, hang out with the virtual reality community and just try to understand what this community is, what they're passionate about, how they do the work that they do. So it really is applying a method that was developed 100 years ago to studying the here and now of the way technology is created and how that technology impacts our lives.
And so, sort of, what interested you in VR in the first place? And then I want to talk about how did you select LA as the place to embed yourself?
Certainly. I was finishing up my previous book, which was titled Placing Outer Space, and it was an ethnography of planetary scientists. And for that project, I was interested in how astronomers and people who study planets, how they make place, how planets are not just scientific objects, conglomerates of gas, dust and rock, but also world and places. And so I had done this whole project about like how placemaking is part of the scientific process. And I was finishing up that book and I was thinking to myself, what's another, interesting science engineering pursuit that is changing, what it means, our understanding of place and how we make place and how we are how we be in place. And I was literally driving to work, listening to NPR. It was the TED Radio Hour, and it happened to be the one they were talking about VR and Chris Milk's TED Talk. And in addition to all of the empathy machine stuff that we'll get to, at one point, either the host or Milk or someone else who was interviewed on the show said, VR makes us rethink what it means to be in place. And I was like, literally overnight, I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to be an anthropologist of virtual reality now, because that is the question that I'm interested in. And then
StreamYard. So
yeah.
still trying to figure out the StreamYard control. So we got a little parade of little girls going by with balloons and party hats. So it distracted me momentarily. Sorry. So I want to. We'll come back to the empathy engine thing. I think you mentioned. And so why Los Angeles? What was special about that community that you decided to embed yourself there besides the weather?
Oh my God, weather was a big part of it. I was in, at that time I was living in Virginia, but I have spent most of my life living in the Northeast New England. So always excited to lack a winter for a year. So overnight, I decided I was going to start doing this project on virtual reality. This was 2015. So it's not like it was everywhere yet. We were in the middle of the first hype bubble, Meta had already purchased, at the time, Facebook had already purchased Oculus. That's why there was even, this NPR show about it to begin with. And so the media coverage was very much about our potential. And there were two things that I was tracking kind of from a distance, just reading media coverage on it, et cetera. One was this empathy machine thing. And the other was this narrative that women were going to be, real leaders in space. And so anytime I saw an article either about those two topics, I would Google who was being mentioned in it. I would look up who they were talking about. Chris Milk, Nani de la Pena, Jackie Mori. And I was again and again being directed to Los Angeles. And to me, that was really exciting because I initially thought I would have to do this project in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And as much as I love Northern California, I had already spent time there. I had already done research in Silicon Valley because my previous project had brought me to NASA Ames, which is located in Mountain View. So I had spent a lot of time in that location. And I just felt like I knew what the story about VR was in the Bay Area. I had a pretty good sense of, as an anthropologist, the kind of story I could tell, what I could learn from that community about VR and about technology development more broadly. And this is partly because I was trained as an engineer. I went to MIT for my undergraduate degree. So I was kind of in the Silicon Valley, Cambridge, Massachusetts tech bubble. And there wasn't necessarily anything that, as an anthropologist, I felt I would be surprised by. But because everyone was in Los Angeles that I kept on looking up, that really surprised me because I had never thought of Los Angeles as kind of a tech hub, as a place to go if what you're interested in understanding was technology. So I just loved that there was this big mystery around what I might be able to discover in Los Angeles. And all of the people I was reading about were located there. So initially I thought maybe I would do some kind of comparative, spend some time in the Bay Area, in LA, maybe up to Seattle, but I just kind of found so much in LA that intrigued me and excited me, that I wanted to write about and research. And so I ended up living there for a year and embedding with the VR community there. And I wrote a book about it. It's 200 something pages long. I have about 500 more pages I could have written because there is so much that, made me excited.
Is there a sequel coming?
Let's see how this. I will be talking about this for the next many years, and I don't think I left it on a cliffhanger, but at the same time, you never know.
Well, and look, and this industry is evolving so rapidly, right? I mean, like the challenge with writing anything about virtual reality is before the ink is dry, it's changed, and so I think it is a continually evolving thing, and the technology is evolving so rapidly now, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later where you think it's going. So.
And I'll just, can I just add on that note of it changes so rapidly? Like, I'm an academic, right? I'm a professor at Yale. My research is half of my job, and the other half of my job is teaching and doing all the other things that academics and professors do. And so whenever I approach a project, I know that I'm not a journalist. I know that I'm not going to be able to get out at the cutting edge, that's completely up to date and relevant for the readers. So writing about an emerging technology as an academic, a very risky proposition. Like when I was in 2015, like I'm going to write a book about VR, I knew it wasn't going to come out for 8 or 9 or 10 years. And so I knew it couldn't be like this up to date, this is the vision of the technology. And, in some sense, what the pandemic allowed me personally was to really bookend my project and to say, what, this book isn't about VR forever and always. This is really about a particular community that was at its height in around 2018 and 2019. And then the pandemic kind of shifted so much of the ecology of this world. And so very much I like to think of this book as in many ways a prequel to where we are now. This helps kind of set up where things have been. So I hope that anyone who's interested in the current market isn't going to this book because they think it'll help them, with where the industry is currently at, but that'll give them a great context of where we came from. And I also just love that every time we come back to you, you're in a new location. And I think next time we'll be in the pool, right? I'll just kind of be on the edge, in your swimsuit.
It's close. I thought about doing it from the hot tub, but I didn't want the computer. So my computer drank a cappuccino at the Sydney Melbourne, I don't know where we were, some airport, and I went without it for 2 weeks. And I had to actually work in an Oculus Quest 3 headset while I was getting ready for this VR arcade conference that I just completed. And so I was in this massive sprint, and I had to do everything in a VR headset. It was the only computer that I had, and I got a little Bluetooth keyboard. And it was interesting because, sorry, this is way off the subject, but it is VR, and it worked. Like it wasn't great. I had to use you could have 3 screens up at once, and I had to use mostly web apps to make things work because they don't have native apps for the Quest really as far as productivity apps. But it kind of worked okay. And once I got a really thick face pad so I could wear it more than 30 minutes without my face falling off, I was able to see the future. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. So anyway, no laptops in the hot tub. That's a hard limit for me. Sorry, that was a weird roundabout.
I appreciate it.
So you've hit on 2 areas. One is you kind of hit on the empathy engine, and your work there was really around cinematic VR. And I want to talk a little bit about cinematic VR and when and why, because I think it was kind of the hot issue back in 17, 18, 360 video, and then YouTube came up with this amazing innovation called 180 video. That was their big, when 360 video didn't work, they went to 180 video. And And again, the technology just wasn't there yet to do really immersive experiences and storytelling experiences, I think, at any kind of scale. And so I'm kind of assuming that that's why you looked at that specifically around cinematic VR, but that's an assumption. So I want you to address that, and then we'll talk about the whole women in VR thing too.
Yeah. So you're right. I don't at all detail anything about social VR. I myself actually haven't spent all that much time in social VR. I've spent a lot of time in VR, but mostly cinematic. And, in some sense, it's partly because I did end up being in Los Angeles. So, if we go back to the puzzle of why is VR happening in Los Angeles? Well, Hollywood is why it's happening in Los Angeles. And I think something that was really important for me, my learning in this research, that when we talk about technology, we usually really are talking about it in relation to Silicon Valley, in relation to Seattle and other tech centers. And we don't think about the entertainment industry as a driver of the tech industry, and I was really caught off guard by the deep connections between Hollywood and Silicon Valley. And maybe that was, again, just naivety. Maybe that was my East Coastness. And if I lived in California, I would have felt that in a more real way. But I think this has only become more apparent to all of us, which is like, if we think about the writer's strike and how generative AI played such a role in that, then that really shows us how essential it is if what we want is to really understand technology and technology's place in our lives. And increasingly, we have to think about it alongside Hollywood, particularly when it comes to these questions of cinematic VR, which again is what I ended up focusing on. So one of the reasons that I was kind of interested in cinematic VR is because I was in Hollywood and kind of tracing that network and the innovators in that space. It was people who were taking their projects to Sundance, to Venice, to the Tribeca. They were taking it to all the film festivals. And so it kind of fits within this larger lineage or longer lineage of, experimental cinema, experimental media, experimental storytelling. And so I was very interested in how VR enabled, or how people thought VR enabled particular kinds of storytelling and storytelling about, nonfiction stories about kind of the real world. Because again, that allows us to shift, we think of VR as something that's escapist and brings you into fantasy lands, to VR as something that can also potentially bring you into the others' worlds. And in the book I write about a lot of the problems of that, like that come from very much my anthropological training, thinking about cultural awareness and cultural appropriation. But it was notable to me that there was nonetheless a deeply felt desire to use VR to go beyond simply entertainment and to ask whether there be a good technology, a technology that could do some kind of good in the world. And I'm an academic, I'm a little grumpy, I'm not always I don't give an enthusiastic yes to that answer, but I'm very admirable of people who strive toward asking that question.
Yeah, and I've been known to be I'm a big believer in what VR is capable of and the future of it. I'm also a bit of a cynic about a lot of the stuff that I see and the hype that goes around it, and it hasn't lived up to its hype in any way, shape, or form really yet. Maybe in some of the really narrow industrial B2B applications for training and stuff like that. I think we're getting there, but I'm kind of with you on. And I'm not an academic at all. I'm just kind of a cynic.
Well, but I will say, what's so interesting. So when I was doing my fieldwork in 2018, because I was in LA, because of the circles I was moving in, I was seeing the high end stuff. I was seeing the state of the art. I was going to and I was seeing people demoing stuff that would go on to win awards at other festivals. And every time I put on a VR headset, I am blown away by the immersion of it, the experience of it. And because of COVID, I was not doing too much high-end. I was only doing stuff that I accessed my Quest and the Quest 2 or whatever at home for such a long time that when I finally got back out into the world in 2021, 22, seeing some of the going back and seeing the high-end stuff, I was actually really surprised at how little it changed.
Lack of progress.
Yeah,
no, totally. I'm so there with you. It astonished me.
And it's funny because storytelling and imagination in 2018 was actually incredible if you go back and think about it. Some of the stuff I saw, I'm just wow, that's so amazing that's what was happening then. Yeah. And it has stumped me to have not seen, you know, I think now maybe things are picking up and I hear there's some very cool stuff that I haven't had the privilege of seeing yet. So I don't want to do a full dismissal, but that was very interesting to me that there wasn't more progress.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think part of the reason for that is, you know, I would go to those VR conferences and it was kind of the same people, the same year after year after year with the same companies and the industry just wasn't growing rapidly enough to attract in new energy and new people and new companies and new money. There was no money, like there was no funding coming into the industry for a while. And I think Apple's entry into the industry last year is changing that. And now you're starting to see people take it seriously because they make markets, right? And so big companies are taking it a lot more seriously. App developers are coming in now, lining up, doing things. And I think we're going to see another innovation spike. But yeah, I'm with you. I came back from the pandemic and went to one of our big location-based entertainment shows. Is called the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. And it's the largest amusement trade show in the world. And you know, that's where LBVR was where a lot of the innovation was happening because people could make money, right? People would pay tickets to shoot zombies in VR, and there was a real economy around that. And I came back thinking that, you know, when the industry shut down, all the companies that survived would have gone back to the drawing board and really done R&D. And I came back and there was nothing. And even this last year, there was very little in the way of innovation. So hopefully we'll see that. I think we'll see that change in the next year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pandemic, you know, obviously had a big impact of taking the wind out of the innovation sales, and especially on location-based VR. Like when I was one of the people in profile book is Marcy Jastrow, who at the time was the head of immersive and the VP at Technicolor, the Technicolor Experience Center, and she was kind of charged with like come up with a good model for like how do we get VR something that is in the entertainment sector that kind of is doing meaningful work, you know, making Color the company money. And by the end of the year, she had kind of come around to like location-based being the way forward. Like the at-home experiences just weren't good enough yet. And it was like the LBVR where she could really see kind of growth. And, you know, so I watched over the year or over this time of working with Jastrow, her evolution and her coming around to like location-based being part of where the future is. And I heard other people say that as well in 2018. It was like, yes, location-based, that's where we're going to really figure it out. That will be our laboratory for figuring out how to tell good and meaningful stories in VR. And then of course a year and a half later it all shuts down.
And then some asshole in a food mart in China ate the head off of a bat, and then we went into a cage. Yeah,
I will neither confirm nor deny. But anyway, yeah, like completely. So there was all this. So there had actually been, what I had witnessed was kind of a shift of people toward LBVR. And then when that became completely unviable, I do think, as you're saying, there was this need to go back to the drawing board, but also an exhaustion of like, really, we're doing this again? Like, we did figure something out, and that progress was, or that momentum was like cut right off.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to shout out to Kyle Render, who's watching the show. Kyle, for those of you that don't know, created the world's first VR comedy club. He's been doing it now for longer than I can remember, like 5, 6, 7 years. He's stuck with it, and it's blowing up. And Kyle's going to be a guest on the Being Virtual show coming up, and I can't wait to do that show with him. And so check out Failed to Render. They've moved around a couple of platforms. I think they were doing AltSpace, and now they've done some stuff in Horizon, and they're doing live stuff now with virtual holograms, and it's crazy, but some real talent. And I've committed to trying to do a stand-up routine on the Failed to Render show someday when I get the guts. And somebody's asking if the book is going to be translated into other languages. What's just a little audience love? What's happening there?
Yeah. I mean, that would be wonderful. My publisher is Duke University Press. This is an academic press, and so it doesn't have a full, force behind it. When translations happen, it's usually a scholar in another country is really, taken with the work and does the legwork to get the translation done. So right now, especially because this book is about the United States, often it's books that are about other places that get translated. So I don't foresee any translation happening, but it is available Kindle and paperback. So, available to English speakers everywhere.
Yeah, cool. So, I just want to make sure we come back to the Women in XR thing, but I want to talk a little bit about, this differentiation that I heard you talk between cinematic VR and social VR, and again, I realize. Have you continued? So you did the work in 20. Walk me through the process of writing the book, just the timeline. So you embedded yourself in 2017, 2018. What was the timeline?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say I decided to do this project on VR. I actually spent a year and a half in a psychology lab that was using VR as a research tool at my university, just to like learn the language of VR before I could do my LA project. So I was really immersed in the science of VR and the science of studying VR and using VR as a research tool. I then kind of did preliminary research in the summer of 2016. I went out to LA. I talked with people. I made sure there was a viable project. And then it wasn't for another year and a half before I got back to the field in 2018. And that's because I was waiting for funding to come through. I was switching jobs, moving to another place. And so the actual research itself was also delayed. So then I spent 2018, the full calendar year from January to December in Los Angeles, working with a bunch of different VR projects, profiling a bunch of different women, taking VR programming classes or development classes, going to meetups, going to festivals, and spending time with folks like Scott Fisher, who has for a long time been, developing VR, including the first VR headset. So really just breathing in VR for a whole year. And then after that, I came back to Yale and then, had to get right back to teaching. They only let you not teach for so long. So in this case, I had 2 semesters off from teaching. But then as soon as I'm back, I'm back teaching, and you spend a lot of time as an academic processing. So I had hundreds of pages of field notes. What that's the tool that ethnographers use, is writing down field notes, hundreds of pages that I had to digest. I had to make sense of. I had to kind of work through my systems of teasing out meaning amongst all of these pages, and then deciding, how do I tell the story about this place and time, and how do I tell the story both for the VR community? Like, I really did want this book to be something that the VR community would at least be interested in. I'm not expecting everyone to read it. It is in the end kind of an academic book, but I hope it has meaning for the VR community, but also for the academic community. I had to figure out, what do anthropologists need to know about this? What does media studies need to know about this? What do the people who are doing critical technology studies need to know about this? And so all of that work meant that maybe it was about a year and a half before I had a first draft of the book, which then went through peer review, editing, went through more peer review, and maybe the final draft came out about 8 months before it sits on my shelf now. So really living, breathing project for 9 years, and very intensely since 2018.
And so, hourly wage, what do you think you made for making this book?
I would be too embarrassed to tell you. I don't know, peanuts. I think it translates to 3 peanuts an hour.
Yeah, wow, it's a tremendous, a huge effort. Like I wrote a book, and it was more to prove to myself that I could write a book than anything, and I did it on a 7-day cruise to Alaska. Just locked myself on an inside cabin, and I promised myself I couldn't have any alcohol each day until I wrote 10,000 words. So the first day I was done at 5, the next day I was done at 7, the next day I was done at 9, because the first 10,000 is easier than the third 10,000. And then I broke that rule, by the way, by noon on the 4th day. But
I mean, Bob, again, anytime you want to switch spaces, you can come into my lovely office with the bare walls, and I will take your spot on the cruise.
I am so impressed with the rigor and the effort and the diligence that you put into this effort to try to bring these stories, to the community, like you said, to the community, so we can hopefully learn from them. And so the timing, it made sense for you to focus on cinematic VR. A lot of noise in Hollywood, the whole, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about the empathy engine thing. I think that, I bought into that for a while. I've used it, and I still think it's possible. I don't know that cinematic VR is the way it's going to happen. I think in 10 years we'll be looking at Chris Milk's statement about VR being an empathy engine. It will be right. He was right. He was just way too freaking early.
Well, can I say,
how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would love to say a couple things about that, because I do want the takeaways. I don't have to re-adjudicate it or whatever, but I think there's a couple really important takeaways of it. The first is, Nani de la Pena is so key to this story. Like, we offer Chris Milk because of the TED Talk, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Chris Milk, even thought to use VR in this way because after Nani de la Pena premiered Hunger in LA in 2012 at Sundance, Shari Freelo was sending all of the experimental filmmakers in LA to USC to see what de la Pena had debuted. And one of those is Chris Milk. And so Chris Milk's first exposure to VR was through de la Pena's imagination of how to use this. And so I'm just like constantly like, let's make sure we get that beautiful part of this history right. Because the other part of that history, of course, is that who helped bring de la Pena's piece from USC, a USC laboratory to Sundance? Well, the lab tech, the PI, Mark Bolas, he wasn't going to let his $50,000, VR rig out the door. And so the lab intern, along with other team members, hacked together a portable thing to take to Sundance. And that lab intern was Palmer Luckey, right? So Nani de la Pena, kind of her vision that VR could be this journalistic device and kind of the invitation to take it to Sundance from Shari Freelo really puts us in the current VR moment that we enter. Got, Oculus kickstarted, which got the Facebook acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. So I find that like origin story, which is an LA origin story, to be super fascinating. But then, the other thing, again, in terms of the takeaway, where I think the empathy machine has potential, where VR has potential as a kind of quote unquote good technology, is insofar it is not thought of as replacing human relations and human interactions, but augmenting. So in the book, I also profile Carrie Shaw, the founder and CEO of Embodied Labs. And they were also producing these empathy experiences, but they were producing experiences for professional care workers, folks who were already, working with and assisting us as we age. And in that case, the kind of the empathy trick that VR was being used for was as a tool to just help these under-resourced people get more resources to better understand and engage with people that they were already in community with. So there's something about using VR to build community that I think is really inviting, as opposed to using VR to replace the need to build community. So watching, refugee experiences like that, as myself, someone who's never, who is not in community with, a refugee population, that strikes me as farther away and harder to realize as a concept and as a technological potential, as opposed to using VR in a way that augments the community and the relations that we already have established. So that's where I see kind of a future potential still possible.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we've used storytelling though to try to, like, with documentaries and fundraisers and stuff like that, to try to build empathy with all kinds of disadvantaged populations, right? And so I wonder. I want to ask you why do you think that's why do you like the Syrian refugee experience? Let's go a little deeper into that. Why do you think that's not the best application of virtual reality? Is kind of trying to get people to, and maybe the word is empathy, maybe it's really sympathy that we're building when we look at stuff like that. Is that really the dichotomy, the nuance that you're talking about?
This is great. I think this is really making good on the deep dive part of the title of this program. So, that opens up so many wonderful questions and thoughts. So, the first time I watched, Clouds Over City, I was on a Google Cardboard, and I went in the next day to the psychologist I was working at in this VR lab, and I just asked him, like, what do you think of this? And I could tell that he was, and this is someone who's worked on VR since the 90s, right? He was involved in Disney Quest, and really worked with Roundy Pausch, and really just in the industry for a long time as a researcher. He's a psychologist. And he said that it made him nervous because he worried about there being a false catharsis of doing VR, precisely because it's so powerful that you feel deeply And in feeling deeply, you forget that you haven't done deeply, right? So there's almost like, the original logic of the empathy machine is like, you feel so much that you're compelled to. Like, how can you not donate after you've gone through that emotional, urgency? And there's another scholar, another psychologist, actually, Paul Bloom, who wrote a book called Against Empathy. And he said, kind of what we need is not necessarily empathy, but radical compassion. We need to be feeling humans in the world, but we can't be overcome by these empathy concerns because they focus us on individuals. And really, if we want to attack problems, they're structural. And so we need to be like rational about how we think about the large scale problems that we have. So in one sense, I think the empathy machine model fails because it's too good. Right? It immerses too much. You do feel too much. And that feeling creates a kind of false sense that I was there. I met, engaged them, because it does, especially if you're new to VR, if you haven't done a lot of VR, it feels as though you've had a human connection. And when you realize that there's no human on the other end of that connection, there's actually a real hollowness to it. So this gets a little bit more philosophical, but it becomes less of a technical question of does this work or doesn't this work? And it's again the question, and it goes more to this question of like, well, what does it mean to be a human and what does it mean to be with other humans? So I think that that's just one of the challenges of the empathy machine. And the other thing I would bring in is, there's a scholar, Saidiya Hartman, who's writing from the perspective of Black studies and African American history, and she has a book called Scenes of Subjection. And in that book, she writes about basically empathy experiences for abolitionists and kind of white abolitionists writing these passionate pleas to other white people saying, you don't understand what is happening in the South and what is happening to enslaved populations. And one of these abolitionists that she writes about, that Hartman writes about, kind of does basically an empathy experience. It says, imagine yourself as a slave. Imagine yourself chained and roped and beaten. Like, imagine your wife, imagine your kid, all of these things. And where Hartman comes down is that empathy becomes really slippery in these cases because it displaces the pain from the person who is being subjected to the pain of the empathizer. And that again creates this false catharsis, potentially creates this erasure, and you don't trust someone else's pain and agony until you feel it yourself. And that becomes like a really burdensome way of being in the world. So it's not really the empathy machine, VR is an empathy machine, that is the problem. As you said before, it's perhaps more of just about this much larger question that we reckon with of like, people are suffering around the world, and like, how do we do anything about that? And we want to do something, right? We have this urgent desire to, and keep on technology to solve these problems. And time and again, technology fails at solving these problems. And so I think it just reminds us that we need social fixes, technical fixes for these problems.
Yeah, and look, and that's a theme in the book, right? Is this concept of that, technologists are trying to solve social, and human problems with technology, and technology ultimately is just a tool, not necessarily a solution. And so talk a little bit more about that. Like, what were some of your takeaways about, being embedded in this industry and hearing what people were saying about VR and its promise and VR for good and all of the stuff that's happening, and what are some of the lessons that we need to learn, and how do we apply, and then what can we do to apply those lessons? Maybe we can chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I arrived in LA in 2018. My knives were sharpened. I was going to go after the empathy machine, stab, let's take this down. It was already down, right? People were already deeply uncomfortable with what it meant. It was like, I read about it. I was like, there was already empathy machine fatigue by the time I got into the field. And in many senses, that was fantastic, right? People listened to the criticism. They said, oh, you're right. I cannot tell someone's story, but I can partner with them to tell their story, right? Those kind of like hanging fixes happened really fast, which I think is incredibly important, and to the credit of the community. There was a real correction that happened. So what I was then excited about was not necessarily coming to like take down this image, but meeting people who were critical about how VR's potentials had been talked about, but still believing that there's got to be something, great about this technology, something that can make it become better. And I really admire, those people. I really admire the optimists who keep on trying to find solutions. And at the same time, here again, I'm a bit of a jaded academic because I come from a discipline, in addition to anthropology, of science and technology, I'm also in the discipline of science and technology studies, or STS. And we have a 40-year history of writing case studies about claims that technology will do good, and seeing that often a technology that is hoping to alleviate some kind of inequity or inequality often leads to its exacerbation. And, I'm not sure what to do with that. Like, as an academic, I know the critique, I hear the critique. And as a person, I'm sometimes unsatisfied with the critique in terms of just like, well, like, what are we going to do? Like, how do we make this better? So it was something that was on the back of my mind as I wrote this book, which was, I wanted to join in voices from my scholarly community in STS and critical technology studies. I'd say here again is an example where we see how a technical solution cannot fix a social problem. And the way we always talk about this in STS is that we don't live in a world where the technical is over here and the social is over here. We live in a world in which it's all mixed up, in which we live in socio-technical systems that, pattern our world. And so if we want to fix the world, we need to think about socio-technical solutions. We can't just think about technical solutions or social solutions. We need socio-technical solutions. And I think that's a real hard mind shift sometimes, to like not think either technically or socially, but to think about them mixed and blended. And because, I was always very, in the end, the people that I embedded with, the people that I worked with, were those who whose work I felt like I could write about positively and I could learn from, but who weren't necessarily doing it perfectly, right? There was bumpy rides in the book that I wanted to make sure I captured, because part of it is to be in the VR industry. So, I mean, that was a rambling answer, and basically it's because you asked me the hardest question, which is like, what do you do? And that's where I'm like, well, I'm in my ivory tower. Why don't you tell me what we should do? And then I can come along and just critique or whatever. I don't want that antagonistic relationship. It's also just like, these are hard problems, and like there's not an easy solution. And so much of the world, the tech world, is asking for easy solutions again and again, and there's just never going to be an easy solution.
Yeah, first of all, let's call it a lighthouse, not an ivory tower. I think there's a beacon that people have to hold up, and that try to guide people towards what the right thing to do is, whatever that might be. And so so this really is kind of techno-social solutions. So we're going to take a hard left turn. It's my show; I can do whatever I want. But I'd love your opinion on this. So Mark Zuckerberg, love him, hate him, whatever. I don't think the VR industry would be here at all if it weren't for him and his vision of the next computing platform, right? And they're spending billions, tens of billions of dollars on R&D, and some of the things they're doing around these codec avatars are actually quite amazing. And he says that, and I want to believe him. I actually kind of believe this about, like, I have real concerns about the impact of Facebook and social media on children and teenagers and society in general. Everything's a paradox. There's good, there's bad. You can't necessarily separate them. And we've had surges in democracy in places because of social media, and ramp up some suicide rates, right? How do you hold that paradox and not look at both of them? But he's really seems to be on this mission of seeing VR as a way of connecting people more meaningfully. And it's not there now, but Facebook seems to be investing in this technology. And then, I don't know if you saw, have you tried the Apple Vision Pro yet?
Mm-hmm. I did the store demo. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. As did I. I haven't plunked down the $5,000 it's going to take to buy one yet, but I don't know if you saw it today, they just released their new 1.2 beta software release of Vision OS. They've updated their avatars. They call them now spatial avatars. And what they've done is they've dissolved the frame around the avatars. The quality is way better. And now in these like collaborative meetings, it looks like these people are actually there in the room with you. And it's shockingly good compared to what the version 1 was. Like the ramp up is amazingly, the progression's amazing. How do you see VR technology? And then we're in this epidemic of loneliness, and people are separated and spread out all over the place, and kids have friends everywhere because they're on Twitch and they're playing games, and so they don't have these local communities where their friends can get together anymore because they're distributed around the world because of just the nature of the internet and the social activities that they portray in. And so we've got this tapestry or this puzzle pieces around there, and so how do you see VR, as a techno-social potential solution to this disconnection that we're feeling as people are traveling more and there's nomads and this and that, and do you see it as a potential solution to that, and what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the question of the moment, right? Like, why is there this loneliness epidemic? Why are young Americans saying that they're less happy? Why, what is happening? Of course, there's no easy or causal answer here. I can't say eliminate social media and we'll be fine, or get rid of cell phones until you're 16 and we'll be fine. We can't do that. So, so first with Zuckerberg, for exactly you said in terms of the ambivalence of Facebook, that it may into horrible things. It shows to me that he is not a leader who is able to steward a technology such that the good is harnessed and the bad is, prevented or mitigated. And especially because he continues in his public facing comments to be completely like almost ignoring the bad stuff. He's never fully came out with a statement that says like,
keeping it under the rug.
He always says, we've always been about connection. We will continue to be about connection. So I am just, my stomach drops thinking that he is going to steward this technology, because we have no evidence that he can make VR's future better than he made Facebook. He made a lot of money doing it, right? Like, and clearly he changed the world, he changed the conversation, but not in a way that had any kind of social responsibility at its heart. And so, like, I don't think we should expect any differently from the way he's going to steward this next platform. VR is the next platform and the next computing platform. And I think because he's gotten so rich, because he's surrounded himself in such bubbles, like, I just don't think he's the right person to offer us a solution where VR actually is a societal net benefit. And so part of me is like, oh, yeah, he keeps sinking in all this money, but I'm just like, is he the person we want as a community, right? If we're the community that cares about VR and VR's future, like, what do we do about that?
Yeah, and I don't think no one person's going to build this, right? I mean, he's investing in the core technology that will enable it and drive competition, and now Apple's in there as well, and Google and Samsung will come along, and HTC is in there, and they're all going to be, competing together. And ultimately, it's the individual developers that are going to build the solutions, right? I mean, like, you look at things like the mobile phone came along, and then we had Uber, and then we had Airbnb, and we have all these Instagram, which changed the restaurant industry, right? Because now you have to worry about how you plate everything, even like chicken wings, and so it's the individual entrepreneurs and the inventors and the trailblazers that are actually going to build the use cases and the applications on the core technology. And it's not going to be, it's not going to be Zuckerberg's metaverse, right? It's going to be everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's only because we resoundingly, like, this was a great example of rejecting technology, right? The Zuckerberg offered Horizons and we said no, right? And that's really remarkable. I showed them in last week, I actually showed my students a bit from Meta Connect 2021, where he first debuted like his vision of the metaverse, and they were just like on the floor laughing. They were like, "Who would want this? I can't believe this was like, like, what is this thing?" And then I showed them Apple's Vision Pro. I showed them the Believer right to see them side by side. Like, look, 2 years apart, these two very different visions of what like this kind of virtual world can be. And like, the Apple one, they were just, it felt very lonely to them, because what you're seeing is people in their house section themselves off in the hotel room because they're busy traveling, like kind of patching the FaceTime with a friend. Like even when, what they observed to me was, even when you see the dad with his kids, he's still like putting back up his work, his work silo.
So
right.
weird.
And so it's just like they were not like excited about this. And because I spend a lot of time talking to 18 to 21-year-olds in my undergraduate classes, and I teach a class called Technology and Culture. So for 7 years as I've been teaching this class, I've been like monitoring their feelings. And they know they're addicted to their cell phones and they don't like it. But they don't know what to do because of the obligation to be on their phones. And like, I'm not someone who like is gonna say like, oh, the world was better before cell phones. No, cell phones are amazing. Like, right? Like, we can connect. I love being able to call my distant friends. I love being able to FaceTime with my distant friends. Zoom made the pandemic possible to get through, right? There's so many, there are ways that technology connects us. I've never doubted that. I don't doubt that. But I don't think we figured out how we use that connection to invest in our local communities, as opposed to use that connection to replace our local communities. And I do think that it's that like feeling not as connected to the humans that we're with like all the time that is putting us in this ambivalent place with our technologies and who they connect us to and how they connect us. So, I mean, this is the problem of our moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the questions I will ask you and everybody else on this show, and you just led up to it perfectly, which is the pace of technological evolution has gone beyond our ability to react to it, to integrate it, to understand how to deal with it. Our governments can't regulate it. Like, it's just going so fast. What do we have like? And you talk about kids, like they're aware that they're addicted, they don't like that they're addicted, and they don't know what to do about it. And I think that's the, that might be the calling card of the generation. Like, what do we do about this? You can't put the genie back in the bottle. We're in a socioeconomic system that that is kind of grow at all cost, progress at all cost.
Well, that's so right, but that's it, right? So I'm going to say probably what will be the most unfavorable comment of this whole program, which is venture capital. That's a big problem, as you're saying, in terms of growth. Like, VC demands not just growth, but a particular kind of growth. And I don't think we can just say, oh, look, technology, it's growing on its own. It's not growing on its own, right? I'm not saying that, but like, it's growing because of the financial instruments that started kind of being successful and pervasive in the 80s, 90s that necessitated a particular business model that has led to this need for growth at all costs. So like, I don't know if we want to like, what if we took VC? I mean, this is just like a thought experiment. What if you took VC as a funding instrument out of the picture? What does our like technological future look like in that case?
Look, I'm not sure. I think that growth is the desire to growth is inherent in nature, right? Like, everything in nature grows. The universe is expanding at ever increasing rates. And right. So just to get a little metaphysical with you, like, growth is inherent in everything. And so, before venture capitalists, there was Wall Street. Before that, there were robber barons. Like, before that, there were, kings and Monty Python. Like, I'm not sure we can, like you said, it's not one thing. I don't think you can point to one thing and say, remove that and it fixes everything. I think I think the reason that venture capitalists exist is because people want to fund companies and grow, and they want capital to do it. And I think the culture, and I've spent a lot of time in Europe now, right? I'm in Spain right now, and here in Europe is very different. It's not grow at all costs. Now, they also don't have a thriving venture capital market, and it's hard for companies to raise money. And so it is all connected. I see that. But they really seem to try to put there's a human element in all of the policy making that they do. And if you look at our governmental policies, there's no people around any of that shit, right? It's just all about economy, GDP, growth, GDP growth, holding the interest. Like, it's everything we do as a culture in America certainly is around growth at all costs. And so, yeah, sorry for the rant. And I'm not trying to be anti-capitalist either. Like, I'm 10 times entrepreneur myself, taking 2 companies public. So, I've played the game, but I just don't think as a society, or as a race, as a human race, we're prepared to deal with the technological disruption that's happening. And I think that the fractures that we're seeing, we're looking for individual points of reference or points of blame. But I wonder how much of it is just this existential angst we feel because it's out of control. There's nothing we can do about it. And it's just freaking everybody out at a subconscious level.
I would love, like, you and listeners and us all, like, wonder if it is so inevitable as we think it is. Like, I'm not going to say it's inevitable or it is inevitable, but what would it feel like if we invested ourselves with agency to say, this is not the world I want. And if this isn't the world I want, what can I do about that? And I think one of the reasons, like, it feels inevitable is because we're not really willing to push back too much on it. We're kind of excited. Like, what is the next shiny thing around the corner? Like, what's it going to be? And I'm going to make $1 million on this, right? Like there's a lot of incentive for us to accept growth as inevitable. And the more I talk to people, the more I'm just like, but what if we think it's not? And, like, you brought up the inflationary universe before, this idea that we're expanding out. Well, one of the cosmological theories is that at some point the universe gets so big that we all come back to one another and we actually enter a deflationary universe. So growth isn't natural. I'm an anthropologist, so I don't think anything is natural, right? Everything is cultural in the end of the day for me, which actually gives me a lot of comfort, right? Because I don't think there's some kind of human nature that we're striving to. I actually think that we're so deeply determined by our culture that it actually allows me as a human to be like, well, if I'm part of my culture, I can change that culture, because it isn't kind of natural outside force that is pushing me in this direction. So again, this is like, I'm responding to your metaphysics with my own metaphysics, which is like, what if we just say it's not this way? What does that do for us? What kind of new avenues might that open?
Yeah, and who's we in that, right? Like, I think that is it you and me? Because we could do that. And, like, how do you gather momentum around that? And that's the the VR for Good movement. Tom Furness and Chris Stapleton, some of those guys are, like, really been banging that drum now for 6, 7, 8 years. But at a certain point, it feels like just shouting into a cave.
And that's, like, sad, right? I mean, how do we get someone like Furness and his collaborators and colleagues? How does that vision of the world get a larger platform, especially because it's not one that can, like, scale and make a lot of, like, it doesn't follow on the VC model. So what is the other model that we can put forward that allows those voices and conversations to thrive? And I think that's part of the struggle, is just what's being incentivized and what's being platformed and given the opportunities. So yeah, tough.
Are you familiar with the Berkana Institute's 2 loops model?
No.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you. It's worth a peek. I'll send you some information on it. But it's a model for systemic change, and it's one that I think could be applied to some of the VR metaverse stuff that we're doing. And it talks about you can't let go of the old. You can't let go of the old until you have the new thing to grab onto. And we're seeing a lot of these people, they break away from the old model and they start creating these communities. And we have a community of communities that build the new system. And then at a certain point, people start jumping off of the old system into the new system. And I think that there's an opportunity to organize some of these smaller communities that are happening around virtual reality and metaverse. And when I say metaverse, I don't mean blockchain and NFT and that stuff. Like, I just think I just put that in its own box. I mean virtual worlds, like, and the more time we spend in, virtual worlds with avatars and Zoom meetings and however you want to define them, the more, we start to question our own reality. So, what? Before we go, your previous book, what was your first book?
My first book, the title is Placing Outer Space, and I worked with planetary scientists and astronomers at NASA, at MIT, and other universities to understand how they understood the cosmos.
Interesting. And so you've got a reasonable understanding of the theory of the theories of the cosmos, then, too, huh?
Yes. It's the beautiful part of being an academic, that I just get to follow where my interests lead me.
Yeah. So do you, and by the way, I totally agree with your ethnographer's, anthropologist's position that culture has a huge impact. I'm not sure it's the only impact, but a huge impact on our reality and how we see the world, right? How do you think virtual reality will play or could play a role in changing people's understanding of what is reality? Because I think that there's this grip and this belief that there is one reality and we all share the same one. And as an anthropologist, I'd love your opinion on whether you think that's true or not. And these VR experiences, do you see them playing a role in kind of expanding people's consciousness?
Yeah, so the title of the book is In the Land of the Unreal. And the unreal is like a term that I end up using as like the central kind of analytic concept. And when I started writing a book about virtual reality, I was kind of like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to probably do something smart about reality. And I felt very unqualified to do that. Like, what am I gonna say about reality that, Plato and all the philosophers since already said. But what I noticed is, and this was like working in 2018 with the VR community in Los Angeles, I noticed that all of like both the youth political and culture moment, VR and LA were all of these circumstances and cases in which where multiple realities proliferated. And so for me, the unreal marks when the multiplicity of reality demands attention. So reality has always been multiple. We experience the world differently, which makes reality something that is, that is not just singular. And the unreal is what opens up the space to contemplate multiplicity. So I think VR very much is something that VR is an unreal technology that allows us to contemplate the multiplicity of reality. And I think that the opportunities there continue to be the ones that intrigue me and excite me as a scholar and a thinker.
Yeah, and I think that I actually believe there's more people experience virtual reality over the next decades that this technology we talk about, you talk about, socio-techno solutions. Ultimately, the solution to a lot of our society's problems is it can be addressed through just the expansions of consciousness, right, at an individual and collective level. And so maybe that's ultimately maybe it's a consciousness expansion machine and not an empathy machine.
Ooh, I like that.
So, Lisa, I thank you so much, for the work that you're doing, which is remarkable and meaningful and important, and for taking, some precious time out of what I know is a very busy schedule as a teacher and a professor and an author and promoting a new book. And so the book's available on Amazon and on Kindle also, I think you mentioned. Is it on Audible yet?
It's not on Audible, but it's also available at the publisher's site. So anywhere you buy books. And I will say it is a lovely physical book. It has like a nice weight to it and beautiful, images and stuff. So I highly recommend the paper book. But the Kindle's good too.
Yeah. Well, get the book, read it. It's fantastic. Check out Kent Bai's podcast, Voices of VR, with Lisa. You guys covered a lot of other stuff that we didn't actually get into. We didn't get into the women in XR thing, and I regret that because that's another area that I really personally struggle. I run a conference, and I struggle every year getting enough women speakers onto the agenda in the location-based entertainment industry. It's a huge challenge as an organizer, and I don't know, like that's a minor challenge compared to the people who are trying to make a living in this business. And so maybe we'll have to circle back to that in another episode. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to all the people who tuned in as well.
Yeah, and this will live live. By the way, Lisa, your StreamYard upload. One of the nice things about StreamYard is it records a really high quality stream on your computer, and it'll upload it to the cloud. So keep your StreamYard window open until you see the recording. If you go to the little recording button on the right, until you see it finished, and then we'll have a really good, solid recording that we'll be able to put on for posterity. I have no idea how bad my internet connection was. How did Elon do? Was it okay?
Everyone's smiling fuzzy, but I think your voice for the most part came through.
All right, cool. Everybody check out the Metaverse Tourism Board. Make sure you sign up for updates there. Let's see, there it is, the MetaverseTourismBoard.com. And they are our sponsor today. And I think I got a banner I can put there. There it is. And Lisa, thank you so much again for your time. We will see you next week. We're going to have Louis Rosenberg, who also just wrote a book with Alvin Wang Graylin, who's going to be on the show a little bit later this summer. And we're going to be talking about a lot about AI and VR coming together, and privacy and security. That's Louis's hot button. And we're going to talk about how do we stay safe in the future. So thanks a lot, Lisa. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week from somewhere in France. I'm not even sure, but au revoir.
Again, anytime you want to switch lives, just let me know.
All right, take care. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye-bye.